Welcome to part 4 of the Ogre project, the super detailed painting guide, and today we are going to be painting fur and then once again go over layering when painting cloth. The new thing we're going to cover here is painting fur. Now, fur can easily be painted by dry brushing, but I'm trying to put some extra effort in this figure, so we are not going to be dry brushing. Instead, we are going to be using kind of a series of washes. Starting off with our leather brown, we're going to use about 3 or 4 washes, and each one of these is going to settle in the recesses, and we're going to apply them in smaller and smaller areas, and that's going to give us our depth and also give a lot of color to the fur. You can see that our first wash is Beastie Brown. You can tell on the palette there that this wash is very thick. We want this wash to go everywhere essentially, so we have a very thick mixture, almost like the same as we would if we were actually layering the paint in. Our second wash, Charred Brown, which is darker, and we have this paint thinner than we used for the Beastie Brown because we want this to settle in the deeper recesses and still show some of that Beastie Brown and also a little bit of that leather brown that we used initially. And our third wash using black, you can see this one is even thinner than the one before, and we are not applying it overall the entire figure. We are applying this more in specific areas, partially for shade, so it's going into the recessed areas, but also this is an animal fur. You're going to have different color variations, especially on a big smelly stinky ogre. So adding it into the center of the fur to give it a little bit color, a little variation. So we have our fur painted, and we could stop there, however, trying to upscale this a little bit. So going back to our original leather brown, because that mostly got covered, and starting to pick out a few areas that I want lighter, wherever the highlights are going to go. Also working around the face, for example. The face where there is, well, I don't want to say no fur, but there's no sculpted fur on the miniature. That we're going to layer up as we would normally do with a miniature. So we want to increase the amount of light there and then proceed to add a little bit more highlight. Once you get the general idea, if you want to skip ahead, you can skip to 6:18 for the next step. The last step for this portion of the fur is one more highlight, simply adding buff to our mixture and trying to pick out, especially on the edges of the fur where it'd be a bit more rough and torn, and of course anywhere we would normally expect to see a highlight. Go ahead and jump to the 8-minute mark once you got the idea. Now we can call the fur finished here if we wanted to, but again, trying to upscale things. So there's a little bit of area underneath the fur that perhaps is the other side of the fur, the skin, and I want to go ahead and pick that out as well. So we are just going to proceed to paint those very small areas and highlight them about 3 or 4 times. In the end, this may seem very minor and kind of wasteful, taking so much time to paint this area that we could just simply paint a dark brown and move on. But it's those little touches that really improve the paint job, going in and taking extra time to paint those little small areas. The next few sections are going to go over all the highlights I applied to the fur skin areas. And once you got the idea of what's going on, you can go ahead and skip to 12:35. For the rest of the video, we are going to be painting his leather bits or cloth bits, whatever they are, and painting the arm wraps first, and then we're going to paint the girdle. I really don't have anything to add here. I kind of left this in just as another example of layering, and hopefully it helps to give you an idea. Remember, we slowly build up transparent layers of paint before moving on to our next highlight. I will say that I did choose red and green, mainly because those are similar to the colors that we used on the skin. We used a little bit of red in the skin, so using red in the cloth and a greater amount is really, it makes logical sense, makes the figure a bit more cohesive. And same with the green I'm going to be using around the girdle, because the yellow we used in the skin tone has a bit of green in it. The only other thing I want to mention is when painting the girdle, you may notice that I'm doing a bit more stabbing with the brush that I'm doing here. That's because I did attempt to do a bit more of a stipple pattern there because I wanted it to be a different material. However, I actually had the paint a little bit too thin, and in the end you actually can't tell the difference between the green and the red. So a little bit of goof up on my part, but it may give you an idea of stippling patterns or a different application technique you can use for layering. Take it for what you will. Other than that, I don't have much else to say. Just enjoy the layering, and I hope seeing the whole process helps you to highlight and shade your miniatures. So we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
This is a job for Weenie Man. Into the Weenie Mobile. Weenie Man away.